Hello everyone, welcome back to another tutorial. So in this tutorial we are going to be creating some navigation functionality. So to get started, let's create a model called navigation. Then let's create a filament resource called navigation, and in here we will have a couple of things going on. But before we start with this, let's actually head over to our navigation table here. So we will have two functionalities here. So one will be the background color, and the other one will be a JSON, and especially if you're on Postgres you need to use JSON, otherwise this will fail, called items. And we will have a boolean called is on sidebar. Or we could also have two different ones called items and items sidebar. Yeah, let's do that. So instead of that, but let's make this nullable and ignore this maybe for now. So if we get started, let's migrate this. All right, perfect. So now inside here you should be able to see navigations, and there we go. All right, so as usual the resource has now been added in here. We'll find a proper icon for this later, but this is empty and let's get something done about that. So to get started with, let's create a color picker called BG color. Let's define the label to be background color. Then we will use something called a repeater. So this is specifying the column in the database, in this case items. It will be stored as a JSON object, and we will also specify that it has certain items inside it. So in this case this can have a schema. So in this schema let's have a few fields. So let's create a text input with something called, let's use title for this case, and this should be required. And then let's make another text input and call this URL required, and actually let's put a placeholder in here. Let's just say it's not example page. And outside of that we don't need anything else for now, but we do want to repeat this one here. So as you remember, inside the migration we also have something called an item sidebar, and let's add that there. So in this case, actually for the simplicity, I think this would probably look better. So we have exactly the same. You can add items, we can drag and drop them, and we also require inside the model, like usual, we need to fill out the fillables before this will work. So let's have something called items BG color, and rename this item sidebar. So now let's try to create test and test1, and let's say login, and let's call this one test2, and let's call this one register. And let's also select the background color of white. Alright, so we have this area here. Argument values must be type of array, string code. So I think this is to do with the fact that we need to specify a cast. So we need to specify the casts. Basically, in this case, we need to cast items as array and items sidebar as array. If we now go ahead and click create, there you go. Now, it's unlikely we need multiple navigations, and I do think it could be useful to have one called a boolean code is active. By default, set that to false. So if we go back to our console and roll this back and then migrate it, then in here we will add in a checkbox called is active, and this is not necessarily the best way to do this. There's many other ways we can do it, but for now this will definitely do. So let's just call this test1 and login. And as we also want to make sure that it's active, then inside the table, let's make sure we have a color picker, bg color, and also have a checkbox column called, and also not color picker, color column, and a checkbox column called is active. For now, that's what we will use here. So in this case, obviously this is white, so that doesn't look very good. But yeah, outside of that, we need to maybe add some more customization in here at some point. Maybe also have specified the logo you want to display in the navigation. But this is basically one way to store the data. So before we start rewriting the entire navigation, let's just try to post out all of the navigation in here and just say all and head back to the main page. As you can see, we now have all of these things here. So we actually have items and items sidebar. So in this case, you may ask, well, how do we want to retrieve this data as a starter, and how do we want to print out all of this? Now, there's many ways to do this, and in the next tutorial we will go over this. But what we're going to do is we're going to take this entire component and then place it inside a Livewire component, and in there we're going to pick up all the active navigation and then outprint all of them in here. By doing that, we would now have a fully customizable navigation system. Later on, when we, for example, introduce pages and so on, what we will be able to do is go inside the navigation resource and be able to search for pages, and in the case that you want to use something that may not exist, for whatever reason, you'll be able to link to there. It could even be an external link later on. So what we could, for example, say is, because this is all stored in JSON, you don't have to modify the database columns all the time. So for example, what we could say is having something called open in new window, open in external. Let's call it external link. Yeah. So if we call this external link, for example, we could then say in here label open in new tab, and we could do the same here. So by design, we want this to be completely empty, and we don't want to pre-fill anything such as the URL or anything like that, because if the user fancy, they could, for example, in this case, link to a different website in the navigation. They may also wish to link to other places. So what we're going to do is we are going to only pre-fill the URL when we detect there isn't anything, and ideally it should just be done by a select component where you can select the URL, or if the URL is not specified there, you can also have one that's a text input. We'll work on this design a bit more in detail later on, again, because we haven't got the pages set up. So when we've got the pages set up, we will make this a bit more advanced, but for now, this should suffice. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.